Silas Mercer, the most feared man in New York, held a fountain pen that felt heavier than a loaded gun. In front of him lay the documents that would dissolve the Mercer empire, a legacy built on blood and steel, now crumbling under the weight of $1 billion debt he couldn't explain. The room was silent, save for the ticking clock and the heavy breathing of the vultures waiting for him to sign. He lowered the pen to the paper, but before the ink could touch the page, a trembling hand slammed a coffee cup down on the mahogany table, shattering the silence. "If you sign that," a soft, terrified voice whispered, "you aren't just going bankrupt. You're confessing to a murder you didn't commit." Rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the penthouse suite, blurring the lights of the Chicago skyline into streaks of gray and gold. Inside the private lounge known as the Obsidian Room, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air smelled of stale cigar smoke, expensive scotch, and the distinct metallic scent of impending ruin. Silas Mercer sat at the head of a sprawling black oak table. At 32, he was the youngest head of the Mercer family in history, a man who had successfully transitioned the family business from back-alley racketeering to legitimate shipping and logistics, or so he had thought. Tonight, his sharp jawline was tight with tension, his dark eyes shadowed by 3 days of sleeplessness. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people earned in a year, but right now, he felt like a man walking to the gallows in rags. Across from him sat Arthur Sterling. Sterling was supposed to be his consigliere, his lawyer, the man who guarded the Mercer fortune. Instead, Sterling looked like an undertaker eager to close the casket. Next to Sterling was Victor Hale, a representative from the Onyx Group, a shadow conglomerate that had bought up Silas's debt. Hale was smiling, a thin reptilian stretching of lips that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. "It's the only way, Silas," Sterling said, his voice smooth and practiced. He pushed the thick stack of documents across the polished wood. The port deal in various sectors collapsed. The SEC investigation frozen your liquid assets. If you don't sign over the shipping lanes and the warehouses to the Onyx Group tonight, the creditors will pierce the corporate veil. They will come for everything. The estate, your accounts, your freedom. Silas stared at the papers. The header read, Asset Liquidation and Liability Transfer Agreement. It didn't make sense. He knew business. He knew numbers. He had personally overseen the port deal. It was solid. Yet 3 weeks ago, everything had unraveled. Accounts were drained, cargo vanished, and suddenly he was owing $300 million he didn't have. "Just sign it, Mercer," Hale said, checking his platinum watch. "My employers are losing patience. You get to walk away clean. We take the debt, we take the assets. You keep your life." Silas gripped the Mont Blanc fountain pen. His knuckles turned white. He had inherited this empire from his father, promising to keep it strong. Signing this was not just failure, it was a betrayal of his bloodline. But he had no leverage. His accounts were frozen, his allies were silent, and the walls were closing in. In the corner of the room, standing in the shadows near the bar, Lydia Cross tried to make herself invisible. It was her 3rd shift at the Obsidian Room. She needed this job. After her father's law firm had been destroyed by a corruption scandal he had nothing to do with, driving him to an early grave and leaving Lydia with crushing law school debt she couldn't pay off. She had dropped out of her final year. She had gone from being top of her class in contract law to serving whiskey to men who terrified her. Lydia adjusted her black uniform, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was supposed to refill the water glasses and leave. That was the rule. Be silent. Be quick. Be blind. She walked toward the table, holding a silver pitcher of ice water. As she approached, the tension in the room made her skin prickle. She poured water into Sterling's glass, then Hale's. Neither man acknowledged her existence. To them, she was furniture. She moved to Silas's side. He didn't look up. He was staring at page 42 of the contract, his eyes glazed over with defeat. Lydia glanced down. It was a reflex. Old habits died hard. She had spent years proofreading contracts for her father, looking for loopholes, for the gotcha clauses. Her eyes scanned the upside-down text on the page in front of Silas. Pursuant to the acquisition of liability, the signatory acknowledges full responsibility for the discrepancies noted in Audit B12, dated October 14th. Lydia froze. The picture in her hand trembled slightly. She knew that date. October 14th was a federal holiday that year, Columbus Day. Banks were closed. Official audits were never filed on federal holidays. It was a clerical impossibility for a certified government audit to be dated then. Her eyes darted to the next paragraph. Transferring ownership of Shell Corp Argos Logistics to the Onyx Group. Argos Logistics. The name triggered a memory from her time as a paralegal intern. Argos wasn't a logistics company. It was a ghost entity, a shelf company, used specifically in money laundering schemes to offload toxic assets before a bust. If Silas signed this, he wasn't just giving away his company. He was accepting ownership of a shell company designed to take the fall for illegal activities. He was signing a confession. Sterling tapped the paper. Silas. The pen. Silas let out a breath that sounded like a growl. He lowered the pen tip to the signature line. Lydia's mind raced. If she spoke, she would be fired, or worse. These were dangerous men. Silas Mercer was a mob boss, legitimate or not. But she looked at his face, the exhaustion, the resignation. He looked like a man being gaslighted. He looked like her father had looked right before the end. She couldn't watch it happen again. "More water, sir?" Lydia asked, her voice cracking. Sterling snapped his head up. "Get out! We are concluding business." Lydia didn't move. She stepped closer to Silas, ignoring the glare from the lawyer. She pretended to wipe a non-existent spill near his elbow, leaning in close. "Sir," she whispered, barely audible, "look at the date on the audit." Silas blinked, the pen pausing millimeters from the paper. He slowly turned his head to look at her. His eyes were dark, intense, and confused. "What?" "The audit date," she breathed, her hand shaking as she polished the wood. "It's October 14th. That was a federal holiday. No audits are filed then." Silas frowned. He looked back at the paper. He saw the date. And Lydia felt like she was jumping off a cliff. Argos Logistics isn't a shipping asset. It's a toxic shelf company. If you sign this, you aren't paying a debt. You're admitting to federal fraud. The silence that followed was absolute. Silas sat perfectly still for 3 seconds. Then the resignation in his posture evaporated. His spine straightened. The predator reawakened. He looked at Sterling. "Arthur." Sterling looked nervous. "Silas, don't listen to the help. She doesn't know what she's—" "October 14th, Silas said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously calm. "Why is the audit dated on a federal holiday, Arthur?" Sterling tugged at his collar. It's likely a typo, a clerical error. It doesn't invalidate the—" "And Argos Logistics," Silas continued, his eyes locking onto Sterling's throat. "Why does this contract assign me ownership of a company I've never heard of? A company she says is a toxic shell?" Victor Hale stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Mercer, sign the paper or we foreclose. I don't have time for conspiracy theories from a waitress." Silas didn't look at Hale. He kept his eyes on Sterling. "You drafted this, Arthur. You've been my lawyer for 10 years. Why are you trying to frame me for fraud?" "I'm saving you," Sterling shouted, his composure cracking. "You're drowning, Silas. This is the only lifeboat." Silas stood up. He was 6'3", and in that moment, he filled the room. He picked up the heavy crystal whiskey glass from the table. "You're fired," Silas said. He hurled the glass at the wall behind Sterling. It shattered with the force of a gunshot. "Get out!" Silas roared. "Both of you, before I forget that I'm trying to be a legitimate businessman." Hale snatched his briefcase. "You're making a mistake, Mercer. You have 24 hours before the bank seizes the port. You'll be begging us to take it back." Sterling looked terrified. He scrambled out of his chair, backing away towards the door. "Silas, listen to me. Out!" The two men fled the room, the heavy oak doors slamming shut behind them. The silence returned, but the air had changed. The suffocating weight was gone, replaced by a buzzing electric adrenaline. Silas stood by the table, his chest heaving. He looked at the contract, then ripped the top page in half. He turned slowly to face the waitress. Lydia was pressed against the bar, clutching her tray like a shield. She was pale. She knew what she had just done. She had humiliated a powerful man's lawyer and interrupted a multi-million-dollar deal. Silas walked toward her. His steps were slow, deliberate. The expensive Italian leather of his shoes made no sound on the thick carpet. He stopped 2 feet away from her. Up close, he was intimidatingly handsome, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow that gave him a dangerous edge. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was no longer a roar, it was a low rumble. "Lydia," she whispered. "Lydia Cross." "Lydia Cross," he repeated, testing the name. "You're not just a waitress, are you?" I was a law student before." Silas studied her face. He looked at her hands, still trembling, then at her eyes, which were wide with fear but intelligent. "You just saved my life, Lydia Cross," Silas said. "Sterling was setting me up. I was too tired, too desperate to see it." "I just saw the date," she said, looking down. "I should go. I'm sorry I interrupted." "You're not going anywhere," Silas said. Lydia's head snapped up. Panic flared in her chest. "Sir, you read that contract upside down in 10 seconds and spotted 2 fatal errors that my entire legal team missed," Silas said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, black phone. He dialed a number. "Kenny," Silas said into the phone, his eyes never leaving Lydia. "Lock down the building. No one enters or leaves without my say-so. And bring the car around. We're going to the firm." He hung up and looked at her. "My lawyer is a traitor. My assets are frozen. I have 24 hours to prove this debt is fake before I lose everything," Silas said. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. "I need a brain that isn't on my payroll. I need someone who knows contracts." "I haven't finished my degree," Lydia stammered. "I don't care about the degree," Silas said. "I care that you're the only person in this room who isn't trying to bury me." He held out a hand. "Come with me, Lydia. Help me tear this contract apart. If we win, I'll pay off your student loans. I'll pay off your family's debt. Whatever you need." Lydia looked at his hand. It was a large, rough hand for a man in a suit. It was a dangerous offer. If she went with him, she was stepping into a war. But if she stayed here, she was just a waitress with a mountain of debt and no future. She took a deep breath and placed her hand in his. "Okay," she said. Silas's fingers closed around hers. "Good." Because the war just started. The drive to Mercer Tower was a blur of rain-slicked streets and neon lights. The interior of the armored SUV was quiet, insulated from the chaotic city outside. Silas sat on one side of the leather bench seat, scrolling furiously on his tablet, issuing silent commands to his security teams. Lydia sat on the other side, her hands tucked between her knees to stop them from shaking. She was still wearing her waitress uniform, a cheap polyester dress that felt woefully out of place in the luxury vehicle. Kenny, the driver, a man whose neck was as thick as a tree trunk, glanced at her in the rear-view mirror, but said nothing. "We have 6 hours until the markets open in Tokyo," Silas said, breaking the silence without looking up. "Once they open, the news of my insolvency hits the wire. The stock tanks. By the time New York wakes up, I'm dead in the water. We need to find the smoking gun before then." Lydia cleared her throat. "Mr. Mercer, Silas," he corrected. He finally locked the tablet and looked at her. "If you're going to save my empire, you call me Silas." "Silas," she tested the name. It felt intimate, dangerous. "You said the debt came from lost cargo. 300 million in shipping losses. That's an impossible amount of inventory to lose in a month unless you were shipping gold bars. Electronics. High-end microchips, Silas explained. Supposedly. The manifest said the ships vanished in the Atlantic during the storms last month. Ships don't just vanish, Lydia said, her mind shifting into legal gear. And insurance covers lost cargo. Why are you liable? Because the insurance claim was denied, Silas said, his jaw tightening. They claimed gross negligence. They said my captain sailed into a hurricane, warning on purpose. Sterling said it was a watertight denial. Sterling lied, Lydia said instantly. The car screeched to a halt in front of a glass skyscraper that pierced the clouds. Mercer Tower. Silas ushered her out, flanked by 3 security guards. They bypassed the main lobby, taking a private elevator that ascended dizzyingly fast. When the doors opened, they weren't in a plush office, but a command center. Wall-to-wall screens displayed shipping routes, stock tickers, and security feeds. This is the war room, Silas said. He tossed his jacket onto a chair. Underneath, he wore a gun holster against his white dress shirt. He unclipped it and set the firearm on the desk next to a stack of files. Lydia stared at the gun. It was a stark reminder. This wasn't just corporate law. This was organized crime trying to go straight. Start digging, Silas pointed to a server terminal. I'm giving you level 5 access. Find out why the insurance was denied. Lydia sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel like a waitress. She felt like herself again. She logged in. Hours bled into one another. The city slept, but the war room was alive with the hum of processors. Silas paced the room, making calls, threatening contacts, barking orders to move assets before they could be frozen. Got it, Lydia said suddenly. It was 3 a.m. Her eyes were burning, but her voice was sharp. Silas was at her shoulder in a second. He smelled of sandalwood and danger. What did you find? The ships, Lydia said, pointing at the screen. The SS Borealis and the SS Orion. They were the ones carrying the cargo, right? Yes. Look at the transponder logs, she said. Sterling submitted these logs to the insurance company. They show the ships entering the storm zone on October 10th. Right. That's the negligence. But look at the maintenance logs from the dry dock in Rotterdam. She clicked a new window. The SS Borealis was in dry dock for propeller repairs from October 1st to October 20th. It never left the port. Silas leaned in closer, his hand resting on the back of a chair. His heat radiated against her back. Wait, if the ship was in dry dock, then it couldn't be in the Atlantic, sinking, Lydia finished. And the SS Orion? I tracked its IMO number. It was scrapped in a shipyard in India 3 years ago. Silas straightened up, his eyes wide. They were ghost ships. There was no cargo, Lydia said, turning to face him. There were no chips, no storm. Sterling created a paper trail for a shipment that never existed, insured it, and then claimed it sank. When he denied the claim on purpose, he created a liability on your books for the value of the lost goods. $300 million for air, Silas whispered. The realization was dawning on him. He embezzled the operating capital to buy the inventory from a supplier. A supplier that Sterling probably owns, Lydia guessed. So he took your cash to buy fake goods, then manufactured a debt to bankrupt you so the Onyx Group could take the rest. Silas walked to the window, looking out at the city he ruled. His reflection was ghostly in the glass. Arthur Sterling has been like a father to me since my dad died. He taught me how to tie a tie. He taught me the law. He taught you how to trust the wrong people, Lydia said softly. Silas turned around. The look in his eyes made Lydia's breath catch. It was a mix of fury and profound sorrow. He walked back to her, and for a moment, she thought he was going to touch her face. Instead, he placed his hands on the desk, trapping her between his arms. "You're brilliant, Lydia Cross," he murmured. "Why were you wasting away in a bar?" "My father," she admitted, looking down at his hands. "He was a partner at a firm like Sterling's. Someone framed him for embezzlement. He lost his license, his pension, our house. He died of a heart attack 6 months later. I inherited the debt. Silas reached out then, tilting her chin up with a rough finger. So you hate men like me. I hate liars, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I hate men who use the law as a weapon against people who can't fight back. I'm a criminal, Lydia, Silas said, his voice low. Make no mistake, my family built this city on gambling and protection rackets. I'm trying to clean it up, but my hands aren't clean. You didn't lie to me tonight, she countered. Sterling did. The moment hung between them, thick with unsaid things. The air crackled with a strange magnetic pull. Silas leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. Then his phone buzzed. He pulled back, breaking the spell. He checked the screen. It's the bank. They're moving the seizure up. We don't have until the markets open. We have 2 hours. The digital proof isn't enough, Lydia said, shaking her head to clear the fog of attraction. We have the dry dock records, but Sterling will claim they are forged. He'll say the transponder data is the real truth. We need the physical manifests, the original purchase orders signed by him. He keeps the originals in his private vault, Silas said, at his firm. Then we need a subpoena, Lydia said. Silas laughed, a cold, dark sound. He picked up the gun from the desk and clipped it back into his holster. We don't have time for a subpoena, Lydia. We're doing this the old-fashioned way. The law offices of Sterling, Vance, and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a Gothic stone building in the financial district. At 4 a.m., the building was a tomb of marble and shadow. Silas and Lydia stood in the service alleyway. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, soaking Lydia's uniform instantly. Silas had given her his suit jacket, but it was enormous on her, smelling of him and rain. Stay in the car with Kenny, Silas ordered, checking the magazine of his pistol. No, Lydia said, pushing wet hair out of her eyes. You won't know what you're looking for. Sterling hides his real ledgers inside the dummy files. It's a double-blind filing system. He taught a seminar on it at my law school. I know how he thinks. Silas looked at her. He hesitated. This was dangerous. If the police came, if Sterling had security. But she was right. He would be looking for a needle in a haystack. She was the magnet. Stay behind me, Silas commanded. If I say run, you run. You don't look back. You don't wait for me. Understood? Understood. Silas approached the service door. He didn't pick the lock. He simply typed a code into the keypad. Lydia blinked. You have the code? I own the building, Silas said grimly. Sterling pays me rent. They slipped inside. The service corridor was dim. They moved silently towards the elevators. Silas moved with the grace of a predator, his body tense, eyes scanning every corner. Lydia followed, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was breaking into a law firm with a Mafia don. Her life had gone off the rails so completely she almost wanted to laugh. They reached the 40th floor. The reception area was plush, filled with modern art and Persian rugs. Silas moved towards the massive double doors at the end of the hall, Sterling's office. He tried the handle, locked. Silas stepped back and kicked the door right below the handle. The wood splintered with a deafening crack, and the door swung open. Alarm, Lydia whispered. Disabled, Silas said. I cut the fiber line in the basement on the way in. They entered the office. It was obsessively neat. A massive mahogany desk, walls lined with legal tomes. The safe is behind the painting, Silas said, moving toward a portrait of a hunt. Too obvious, Lydia said. She scanned the room. Her eyes landed on the bookshelf. Sterling is arrogant. He doesn't hide things in walls. He hides them in plain sight, where he can see them and gloat. She walked to the bookshelf. He taught us that the safest place for a secret is inside a lie. She pulled down a thick red volume titled Ethical Practices in Corporate Law. Silas snorted. Ironic. Lydia opened the book. It was hollowed out. Inside wasn't a file, but a small, intricate key and a USB drive. That's the key to the off-site storage, Lydia said, disappointed. The physical files aren't here. Wait, Silas said. He grabbed the USB drive. Plug it in. Lydia ran to Sterling's computer. She bypassed the password using an admin override she'd learned from a hacker ex-boyfriend, a skill she rarely advertised. She plugged in the drive. Files populated the screen. Hundreds of them. It's not just the shipping deal, Lydia whispered, scrolling. Silas, look. The union bribes, the Port Authority blackmail, the judge payoffs. Silas leaned over her shoulder. He kept records of everything. It's his insurance policy, Lydia realized. If the Onyx Group ever turned on him, or if you did, he had the dirt to take everyone down. Here, Silas pointed, the Argos folder. Lydia opened it. There it was. Scans of the original purchase orders for the ghost chips, signed by Arthur Sterling, and an email chain with Victor Hale from the Onyx Group explicitly discussing the setup. Email from Hale to Sterling. Ensure Mercer signs by the 15th. We need the assets liquid before the audit. The girl at the precinct has wiped the transponder data. We have them, Lydia said, pulling the drive out. This proves fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. The debt is void. We need to get this to the SEC and the FBI, Silas said. Now. Sudden bright lights flooded the room. Lydia screamed, shielding her eyes. Silas spun around, shielding Lydia with his body, his gun raised. Standing in the doorway were 3 men. In the center was Victor Hale, holding a suppressed pistol. Flanking him were 2 massive private military contractors holding assault rifles. I told you, Mercer, Hale said, his voice smooth and cold. You should have just signed the papers. Arthur Sterling stepped out from behind Hale. He looked disheveled, pale, and sweaty. I told you he would come here, Victor. I told you Silas wouldn't just roll over. Arthur, Silas said, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. You sold me out for what? A cut? For survival, Sterling shouted, his voice cracking. The Onyx Group isn't just a company, Silas. You don't know who runs it. You were sinking, and I wasn't going to go down with the ship. So you invented a storm, Lydia said from behind Silas's back. She peeked out, her voice surprisingly steady. You invented a debt. Hale laughed. Smart girl. Too smart. It's a tragedy, really. A break-in gone wrong. Disgruntled ex-employee shoots the boss, then the loyal lawyer shoots the employee. Very clean. Hale raised his gun, aiming at Silas's chest. Put the gun down, Mercer, Hale commanded, or I shoot the girl first. Silas hesitated. His eyes flicked to Lydia, then back to Hale. The grip on his pistol tightened. Don't do it, Silas, Lydia whispered. They'll kill us anyway. Drop it, Hale barked. Silas slowly lowered his gun to the floor. He kicked it away. Good, Hale smiled. Now give me the drive. Lydia clutched the USB drive in her hand. It was their only leverage. It was the only proof. Lydia, Silas said, his voice calm, almost conversational. Give him the drive. But give it to him. Lydia stepped out from behind Silas. She walked slowly toward Hale, her hand extended. Hale reached out with his free hand to take it, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Just as their fingers brushed, Silas moved. It wasn't humanly fast. It was desperate. Silas didn't lunge for Hale. He lunged for the heavy light switch on the wall next to him. Click! The room plunged into total darkness. Get down! Silas roared. Lydia dropped to the floor instantly. Gunshots erupted. Bright, deafening flashes in the dark. Pop, pop, pop! The sound of shattering glass and splintering wood filled the air. Lydia scrambled under the heavy oak desk, curling into a ball, covering her ears. She heard a grunt of pain, the sound of a body hitting the floor, and the chaotic shouting of the guards. Flashlights! Get him! Hale screamed. A beam of light cut through the dark. Lydia saw Silas rolling behind a leather sofa. He had retrieved a second gun, an ankle piece she hadn't seen. He fired twice. One of the contractors went down, clutching his leg. "Lydia, the window!" Silas shouted. The window behind the desk was floor-to-ceiling glass. It looked out over a 40-story drop to the street below. There was a narrow maintenance ledge, maybe 2 feet wide, running along the exterior. "Are you crazy?" she screamed. "Go!" Silas returned fire, suppressing Hale and the remaining guard. "I'll cover you. Open the latch." Lydia fumbled with the heavy brass latch on the window. It was stuck. Bullets were tearing up the books above her head. Paper confetti rained down on her. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, she yanked the lever. The window swung outward, letting in the howling wind and rain. She crawled out onto the wet, slippery ledge. The wind threatened to tear her off. The city looked like a dizzying abyss below. Silas fired one last shot, hitting the chandelier above the gunman, bringing it crashing down in a shower of crystal. In the confusion, he sprinted for the window. He dove out onto the ledge just as Hale's bullets shattered the glass pane he had just come through. Silas grabbed Lydia's arm, steadying her against the wet stone. They were 40 stories up, trapped on a ledge in a storm with killers inside. "Do you trust me?" Silas yelled over the wind, wiping rain from his eyes. Lydia looked at the drop. Then she looked at him. His eyes were fierce, alive, and focused entirely on her. "I trust you," she screamed back. "Then we climb," Silas said, pointing to a fire escape ladder on the adjacent building, just a terrifying 5-foot jump away. "On 3. 3!" Silas shouted the number into the gale, and he didn't wait to see if she was ready. He grabbed Lydia by the waist and launched them both off the slick stone ledge. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, they were weightless, suspended in the black void between the skyscrapers. The wind roared in their ears, a deafening scream of nature that drowned out the gunshots echoing from the broken window behind them. They slammed into the metal grating of the fire escape on the opposite building. The impact was brutal. The rusted steel groaned under their combined weight, swinging dangerously away from the brick wall before slamming back with a metallic clang. Silas took the brunt of the collision, his back hitting the railing with a sickening thud, but he kept his arms locked tight around Lydia, shielding her head from the iron bars. Lydia gasped. The air knocked out of her lungs. She was dangling precariously over the edge, her feet kicking at empty air, held up only by Silas's grip on her coat. "I've got you," Silas grunted through gritted teeth. His face was contorted in pain, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where the glass had grazed him. He hauled her up, his biceps straining against the fabric of his soaked shirt. She scrambled over the railing, collapsing onto the wet metal platform. Her knees were shaking so violently she couldn't stand. "Move!" Silas ordered, pulling her up. "They'll start shooting across the gap in 10 seconds. As if on cue, a bullet sparked against the brickwork inches from Lydia's head. "Go down! Fast!" They scrambled down the zigzagging ladders. The metal was slippery with rain and moss. Every step was a gamble. Above them, beams of tactical flashlights cut through the rain, searching for them like searchlights in a prison break. By the time they reached the alleyway floor, they were both drenched, shivering, and gasping for air. The alley was dark, smelling of wet garbage and exhaust fumes. "My phone," Silas said, patting his pockets. "It's gone. Must have fallen during the jump." Lydia checked hers. The screen was shattered, a spiderweb of black cracks. "Mine is dead." "Perfect," Silas muttered. "We're ghosts." He grabbed her hand again, pulling her towards the main street. But before they reached the sidewalk, the wail of sirens pierced the night. Blue and red lights reflected off the wet pavement. "Police?" Lydia asked, hope rising in her chest. "We can give them the drive." Silas pulled her back into the shadows, pinning her against the rough brick wall. "Think, Lydia. Sterling called the police before we even got to the safe. He'll spin the story. To them, we aren't victims. We're the intruders who broke into a law firm and shot a security guard." Lydia felt the blood drain from her face. "We're fugitives." "Until we prove otherwise," Silas said. "We can't go to the cops. Not until we know who's on Hale's payroll. We need to get off the grid." They moved through the shadows of the city, sticking to back streets. Silas moved with a practiced stealth, avoiding security cameras and patrol cars. He led her to a grimy, dimly lit parking garage under a crumbling apartment complex in the Lower East Side. He stopped in front of a dusty, vintage Ford Mustang covered in a tarp. "Is this yours?" Lydia asked. "It was my father's first car," Silas said. He reached under the rear fender and pulled out a magnetic keybox. "Nobody knows about it, not even Sterling." The engine roared to life with a guttural growl. They sped out of the garage, merging into the thinning traffic of the early morning. Silas drove for 40 minutes, leaving the glittering skyline of Manhattan behind. They crossed bridges and navigated potholed roads until they reached a quiet, industrial neighborhood in Queens, lined with old brick warehouses and row houses. He parked in an alley behind a modest two-story house with peeling blue paint. "Where are we?" Lydia asked, eyeing the neighborhood warily. "My childhood home," Silas said, killing the engine. "My mother lived here until she passed. I haven't been back in 5 years." They entered through the back door. The house smelled of dust and lavender. It was frozen in time. Doilies on the tables, a crucifix on the wall, photos of a young Silas in a baseball uniform on the mantelpiece. It was a jarring contrast to the obsidian penthouse and the violence of the night. Silas locked the door and deadbolted it. He went to the windows, drawing the heavy floral curtains. Only then did he seem to deflate. He slumped onto a plastic-covered sofa, wincing as he touched his side. "You're hurt," Lydia said. She saw the dark stain spreading on his white shirt, just above his hip. "It's a graze," Silas dismissed it. "From the office." "Let me see." Lydia didn't wait for permission. She pushed his hand away and lifted the hem of his shirt. A bullet had furrowed a nasty groove along his side. It wasn't deep enough to hit an organ, but it was bleeding sluggishly. "I need a first aid kit," Lydia said, her voice firm. "And vodka or whiskey? Anything high proof." Silas pointed to a cabinet in the kitchen. For the next 20 minutes, the dynamic shifted. The Mafia boss was the patient. The waitress was in charge. Lydia cleaned the wound with whiskey, her hands steady, despite the adrenaline crash making her whole body tremble. Silas watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. "You have good hands," he murmured as she taped the gauze in place. "I used to patch up my dad," Lydia said quietly. "After the scandal, he got into fights at bars. People would call him a thief. He'd swing first. I was the one who stitched him up, so he didn't have to go to the ER and answer questions." Silas sat up, wincing slightly. He looked at her with a newfound respect. "We're a pair of strays, aren't we, Lydia? Both cleaning up messes we didn't make." "Why didn't you just sign?" Lydia asked, sitting back on her heels. "You could have walked away. You have money stashed, don't you? You could have lived on a beach somewhere." Silas looked around the dusty room, at the ghosts of his past. "Because the name Mercer means something," he said. "My father was a criminal, yes. But he had a code. He protected this neighborhood. He never sold drugs. He never hurt women. He wanted to go legitimate. He died before he could finish the job. If I signed those papers, I wasn't just losing money. I was letting scum like Hale and Sterling turn my family's legacy into a toilet for their dirty money. I couldn't let them win." He reached out, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, electrifying. "And now," he whispered, "I dragged you into it." "I jumped," Lydia reminded him, her heart beating fast. "You didn't push me." The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the same intensity as the office, but softer now. Silas leaned in. The gap between them closed. But before their lips could touch, the old television set in the corner of the room flickering to life. Silas had turned it on earlier to mute, but the breaking news banner caught his eye. He grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. A news anchor with a grave expression was speaking. Behind her was a photo of Silas and a grainy security camera image of Lydia from the law firm lobby. Hunt continues for mob boss Silas Mercer and his accomplice, identified as Lydia Cross. Authorities say the pair are armed and dangerous, responsible for a brutal attack on the law offices of Sterling and Associates that left 2 security guards in critical condition. Sources say Mercer may have kidnapped Cross, though police are investigating her possible role as a conspirator. Lydia stared at the screen. Accomplice? Kidnapped? They're controlling the narrative, Silas said, his face hardening back into stone. He stood up, ignoring the pain in his side. They want the public to see us as monsters, so that if the police shoot us on sight, nobody asks questions. He turned to Lydia. We can't hide here. They'll run facial recognition on the street cams eventually. We have to finish this. Today. Sunlight filtered into the dusty safe house where Lydia sat on the floor, eyes glued to the encrypted laptop. I cracked it, she said, her voice tight. Silas, look. The Onyx Group isn't just a company. It's a funnel for Senator Preston's campaign. And there's a wire transfer scheduled for noon today. $50 million of your money is going to an offshore account in the Caymans. Silas checked his watch. 9 a.m. If that money leaves the US, it's gone forever. We have 3 hours. We can't stop a wire without a judge, Lydia said, and we're wanted fugitives. Then we go to the one judge who hates corruption more than he hates the mob, Silas said. Judge Perello is at the federal courthouse today. They raided the closets. Lydia emerged in a vintage cream Chanel suit found in Silas's mother's wardrobe, looking not like a victim, but a CEO. Silas donned a black turtleneck and leather jacket. You look like you own the place, Silas said. They abandoned the Mustang near the courthouse. To bypass security, Silas called in a favor from the sanitation union. Moments later, 3 garbage trucks jackknifed in front of the main entrance, dumping tons of refuse and causing absolute chaos. While the marshals rushed to manage the scene, Silas and Lydia slipped in through a side door. Inside, the marble halls were cold and echoing. On the 3rd floor, they froze. Walking toward them were Arthur Sterling, Victor Hale, and Senator Preston, laughing as they left a hearing. We have to stop them here, Lydia whispered. She stepped out from behind a pillar, her heels clicking loudly. Senator Preston! The group froze. The senator turned, smiling politely. Do I know you? I'm Lydia Cross, she announced, her voice ringing out. And I have the proof that you're stealing $50 million from the Mercer estate. Sterling paled. She's the fugitive. Hale, call the marshals. I have a USB drive, Lydia bluffed, holding it up. If I don't enter a code in 2 minutes, the evidence uploads to the FBI. Silas stepped out beside her, towering over the politician. Hello, Arthur. He's armed, Hale screamed, abandoning subtlety. Marshals swarmed the hallway, weapons drawn. Freeze! Show them the drive, Lydia! Silas yelled, raising his hands. Plug it into the wall, screen! Hale lunged. He tackled Lydia, slamming her into the wall. The drive flew from her hand, skittering across the polished marble floor. Silas roared, punching Hale, but a taser crackled. Silas convulsed and hit the ground, pinned instantly by 2 officers. Lydia scrambled on her hands and knees towards the drive, but a polished black shoe stomped down. Crunch. Arthur Sterling ground his heel into the plastic. Oops, he whispered, kicking the debris toward a drain. Clumsy me. No proof. No case. What is the meaning of this racket? A booming voice echoed. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open. Judge Anthony Perello stood there, looking like a furious gargoyle. Just apprehending fugitives, Your Honor, Sterling lied smoothly. We were trying to show you evidence, Lydia screamed from the floor. Check the senator's accounts. Perello looked at the shattered drive, then at the senator's smug face. Bring them into my chambers, the judge ordered, immediately. Rain battered the thick glass windows of Judge Perello's chambers, sealing the room in a heavy, quiet tension. Silas sat in a wooden chair, his hands cuffed, a bruise darkening his jaw. Lydia sat beside him, her cream suit smudged with dirt, her hands clenched tight. Across the mahogany desk, Judge Anthony Perello, known as the Hangman for his ruthless sentencing, stared at them over the rim of his spectacles. "You have 5 minutes," Perello growled. "Convince me not to lock you both away for contempt and assault." "We didn't assault anyone," Silas said calmly. "We were silenced." "Your lawyer destroyed the evidence," Perello countered, gesturing to the door where the marshal stood guard. "Without that drive, your claims about Senator Preston are just stories." "It's not just a story." Lydia stood up, her legs shaking, but her voice steady. "Your Honor, we don't need the drive. The fraud is already in the public record. You just need to know where to look." Perello raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Go on." The audit that seized Silas's assets was filed under docket 77B, Lydia said, pacing the small room. "It lists the audit date as October 14th. That was Columbus Day, a federal holiday. The SEC was closed. It is legally impossible for a federal clerk to notarize a government audit on a day the government is shut down." Perello paused. He opened the file on his desk, his eyes scanning the paperwork. He pulled a magnifying glass from his drawer. The room was silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock. "Furthermore," Lydia pressed, "the asset Argos Logistics is registered in Delaware. If you check the Secretary of State's database, you'll see the owner isn't a shipping company. It's CP Holdings. Charles Preston." Perello reached for his phone. He made 2 calls, one to the court clerk, one to the Delaware Records Office. For 3 agonizing minutes, Silas watched Lydia. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a force of nature fighting for his life. Perello hung up the phone slowly. He took off his glasses. "The clerk confirms no audits were processed on October 14th, Perello said softly. "The document is a forgery. The seizure order is void." He looked at the marshals. "Uncuff him." The metal clicked open. Silas rubbed his wrists, relief washing over him. "Thank you. But we have a bigger problem." It's 11:55 a.m. At noon, Sterling wires $50 million of my capital to an offshore account. Once it leaves the US, it's gone. "We can't stop a wire in 5 minutes, the marshal said. "We need a warrant." "No warrant needed," Lydia said sharply. "Your Honor, issue a verbal temporary restraining order to the bank. Cite United States versus Weiss. You have the authority in exigent circumstances involving felony money laundering." Perello stared at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You know your case law, Miss Cross." He snatched the phone and dialed the bank's legal department on his private line. "This is Judge Anthony Perello," he boomed. "I am issuing an immediate freeze on all accounts related to the Onyx Group. If a single penny leaves your bank at noon, I will hold your entire board in contempt and sign arrest warrants for facilitation of fraud." He listened. He checked his watch. 11:59 a.m. "I don't care about the automated system. Pull the plug." The second hand swept past the 12. Perello listened for a heartbeat longer, then exhaled. "Thank you." He hung up and looked at Silas. "The transfer was killed. The money is safe." Silas slumped back in his chair, closing his eyes. They had done it. "Marshals," Perello said, his voice turning to steel. "Go to the lobby. Arrest Arthur Sterling and Victor Hale, and bring Senator Preston here. I think we need to have a long talk about his campaign finances." 6 months had passed since the storm broke. The gloom of winter had given way to a brilliant spring sky. The obsidian room was no longer a tomb of smoke and dark wood. The heavy drapes were gone, replaced by sheer linen that let the sunlight flood in. Silas Mercer stood on the balcony, looking out at a city that no longer felt like a prison. On the desk behind him lay a newspaper with the headline, "Senator Preston indicted on racketeering charges." Arthur Sterling had already taken a plea deal for 15 years. The purge was complete. The glass doors slid open. "You're brooding again," a voice teased. Silas turned. Lydia stood there, radiant in the afternoon light. She was no longer the terrified waitress in a polyester uniform. She wore a tailored navy dress that commanded respect, and in her hand She held a rolled parchment. Juris Doctor, summa cum laude. Reflecting, Silas corrected, a genuine smile breaking across his face. He took the diploma. Congratulations, Counselor. It feels surreal, Lydia said, joining him at the railing. My father's name is cleared. The debt is gone. We balanced the scales. We did, Silas nodded, but I realized something. I spent 10 years running this family with fear. I thought that was power. But that night in the office, when you spotted what no one else could, that was real power. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a black velvet box. Lydia's breath hitched. She looked at him, eyes wide. Don't panic, Silas laughed softly. It's not a ring. Not yet. He opened the box. Inside lay a heavy gold fountain pen, engraved with the initials LC. I've restructured the company, Silas said, handing her the pen. Mercer Logistics is now 100% legitimate. No more backroom deals. No more shadow games. But I can't run it alone. I know how to be a boss, Lydia. I don't know how to be, good. I need someone to check the fine print. He pulled a document from his jacket. Partnership agreement. Mercer and Cross Legal Counsel. I bought back your father's old firm building, Silas said quietly. It's yours. I want you to be my general counsel. My partner. 50/50ths. Lydia looked at the contract, stunned. Partner? In business, Silas said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble. And if you're interested, in the rest of it too. Lydia didn't need to read the fine print this time. She looked from the contract to the man who had dragged her into a war only to give her the world. She uncapped the gold pen. One condition, she said, hovering the nib over the signature line. No more secrets. We run the war room together. Silas took her free hand, kissing her knuckles. No more secrets, I promise. Lydia signed her name with a flourish. Lydia Cross. She set the pen down, and the distance between them vanished. Silas pulled her close, and when he kissed her, it wasn't the desperate act of two fugitives on a ledge. It was the promise of a future they had built from the ashes. The king had found his queen, and their reign was just beginning. What a journey! From a waitress noticing a simple date error on a contract to taking down a corrupt senator and saving $1 billion empire, Lydia and Silas proved that sometimes the sharpest weapon isn't a gun. It's a brain that pays attention to the details. This story reminds us that even when the walls are closing in and the experts say it's over, one person with the courage to speak up can change everything. It's a testament to trust, redemption, and the idea that nobody is defined solely by their past. Have you ever spotted a mistake that everyone else missed? Or have you ever felt like the underdog who held the key to the solution? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of legal drama and romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a good plot twist, and subscribe with the notification bell on so you never miss the next story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.